India became the first country to legally mandate corporate social responsibility in the year 2014. The rules in Section 135 in the Companies Act in India made it mandatory for companies of a certain turnover and profitability to spend 2% of their average net profit of the past 3 years on CSR. Now, that is in a nutshell what CSR is. Now, I welcome our President, Dr. Ranjana Banerjee, to say a few words before we talk about Mrs. Ami Misra, who is the session speaker. Dr. Banerjee, please.
Thank you, Purvi. Good evening, dear friends. For the past 2 years, IQWA has been bringing to you discussions on areas which are extremely pertinent and focused on the different ways we can empower women. For a long time, I have been thinking of bringing in somebody to give us details and the nuances of the CSR, where the companies are coming forward to fund projects. Now, as we know that empowering women through different kinds of skill-based projects or academic projects is the vision and the mission of IQWA to help them stabilize themselves in their path of life. When we first heard of Ami that she will come in for this talk, I was very happy that for the first time we are getting in somebody from that field so that we will come to know how in the different ways and procedures we can work even better in this area. Projects, skill-based projects, or even academic projects, singular projects, collaborative projects, all these are essentially for the simple reason that we help them, women, to become self-reliant. However, for every project, funding is a major area. And today, we will be fortified with the knowledge that we get from this discussion to proceed along the ways in which we can secure funding for a very relevant projects, and that will also help IQWA to take a step forward. Thank you, Ami, for coming in for this very informative discussion. Over to you, Purvi.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, President. I will just briefly introduce Ami to you, who is actually going to handle the session. Ami is a development professional and researcher working with CSR and Funders. She presently leads research and insights for funder advisory at Dasra. Dasra is India's strategic philanthropy firm amongst many other NGOs that philanthropic firms that are there in India. She has worked primarily as a researcher, providing small inputs for promoting evidence-based solutions and convergence across development programs for a decade. Her work entails advisory research and knowledge creation with a focus on gender intersectionality. Her worldview is rooted in feminism, compassion, and intuitive optimism. Now, her educational background, she has a certificate of advanced studies in public governance and administration from ETH Zurich and a master's degree in women's studies from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, TIS. And prior to Dasra, she has worked in Niti Aayog, Columbia Global Centers, UN Women, and TIS. So this is the brief background. I think she is quite capable of handling the session. Over to you, Ami.
Thank you so much, Purvi ji, for that introduction. And a very warm welcome to all of you. Purvi ji, if I could request you to please allow me to share my screen.
Just a minute.
Yes. Also, I had created a poll on Mentimeter. Are all of you familiar and comfortable with using Mentimeter? A simple thumbs up will do. Or I can also skip it and move to the content because we have a lot to cover. Purabhi, you could make me co-host, and I think that should do it.
Where is co-host?
You just go to the participants, and then on my name, you just say,
Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm only getting make host.
Okay.
If I put you on host, then I'll not be able to let other people enter. That's the problem.
Then in the middle, if you see the share screen sign, next to that, there'll be an arrow which says allow participants to share screen.
I've already done that.
Okay. But it says host participant.
Just check if you can see it now.
Oh, yes, now I can. Yes,
Okay.
yes. Yes, thank you so much. All right. So can I please get a heads up on Mentimeter? Professor Banerjee or Purabhi, if you could tell me, should I go ahead with a Mentimeter?
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead the way you are going to present. There's no need
Go ahead.
to ask.
All right. I just thought that a nice icebreaker to get us started will be nice.
Please go.
So I have posted a link in the chat. And those of you who have your phones on, you can also scan the QR code from over here. All right. I think just to expedite the process, because we are already at 5:25, I'll come back to the Mentimeter poll at the end of the session. Let me first try to cover ground on everything that we have ahead of us today. So let me give you a brief about where and how the presentation is structured. We are going to look at the larger concepts of gender equality. And I'm sure that all of you are aware of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. A lot of my understanding of gender equality is based on that. I will be sharing this presentation with you after the session. So the idea is to also leave you with some reading material that you can refer to at your own time and pace. So on this slide, I have mentioned all the different subcomponents of gender equality as understood under the SDGs. Moving from there, this presentation today is going to cover the ways in which the Indian funding landscape covers women's empowerment and what is the current status of women's empowerment in the country today. As of now, our gender indicators have not been very great. And the issue of gender equality actually requires attention from funders, individual corporates, etc., to fill the gaps. And over this session, we are going to try and understand first what is the landscape of funding like in India. Purabhi ji mentioned to you in the beginning of the session about corporate social responsibility, but I will go slightly beyond it to show you what is the different kinds of funding mechanism that is available if you are indeed working on women's empowerment in this country. So I'm going to start first by showing you a landscape of the different components of our country, India. So I'll go into the Samaj, Sarkar and Bazaar, which is basically the state, markets and civil society. And I'll show you what the landscape looks like. When it comes to the markets, I'll primarily cover who the funders are and what are the major sources of funding. When it comes to civil society, I'll try to cover some of the structures that are legally recognized to receive money. I won't be covering the government in very great detail because the scope of the session and the boundary conditions require me to focus on the markets and the civil society. So that's just some broader context setting. And after a few minutes of speaking, I will stop to take questions and hear some of your reflections. So I have prompts for myself to stop and discuss with you at different intervals. So it will be great if you can all come in with your questions and thoughts from time to time so that we can make sure that this is a cross-learning process. So with this, I'll begin with the landscape first. Like I mentioned to you, I wanted to show you the social sector in India today is comprised of these three components. You have markets for you have markets for building the capital, driving programs to scale, and providing grants to the social sector. You have the civil society for delivering services. Like you mentioned, IFUA actually has programs for women. So that means that you are delivering a service. You are creating some sort of a service to empower the girl at the end of the day. So civil society is for service delivery, building awareness, and undertaking advocacy. And government is for ensuring the welfare of citizens, social protection, law and order, and regulation. So if you look at the funding landscape and if you see markets, there is philanthropy, which is basically personally motivated, and it includes individuals as well as family foundations. And there is industry, which includes CSR and corporate foundations, as well as human resources within corporate teams. So the HR and the industrial relation teams are also part of actually creating grants in the social sector. And within the context of the civil society, the organizations we are going to be looking at are largely non-profit organizations, which can be divided into two broad categories. One is by scale, wherein they could be community-based, regional, national, or international, or it could be dependent on the role that they take up. So it could be linked to service delivery, which is basically running a program on ground. For instance, upskilling girls or running a creche at the work site for women construction workers, or rights and advocacy based, which is basically building awareness among women about their rights and ensuring that they get the due social protection from the states. And then there are intermediary organizations like the one that I work at, Dasra, which connects funders to nonprofits, because there is some amount of mistrust in the social sector, for which intermediary organizations actually play that bridge. So this is broadly the landscape that we are looking at within the social sector, available to working to programs focused on women's empowerment. I just wanted to run you by some broad stats, which are actually really interesting. If you look at the total number of registered nonprofits in India, we are at 3.1 million registered social sector organizations, which means that we have one nonprofit for every 400 people. Compared to the US, where there are 1.2 million nonprofits, one for every 200 people. Now, the social sector in India, sometimes we don't recognize the value of it and how many of us are actually working in social organizations. The sector right now employs 7.2 million people by conservative estimates. And this is far more than sectors like automobiles and IT, which actually catch the limelight of the news all the time. So we do provide a lot of jobs to people on ground. Moving on to some stats around government. The government spends 8.6% of its GDP to social causes, but the country needs to spend about 13% of its GDP to meet the sustainable development goals targets. Now, apart from this, I also wanted to highlight to you that despite the mistrust and despite what we hear in the news sometimes, there is a very strong relationship between the government and the civil society and non-profit sector. because if you read about the Niti Aayog statement on non-profits, you learn that there was a lot of outreach done to civil society organizations, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, in order to support relief efforts on ground. And the government continues to rely on the agility of non-profit organizations, because the extent of problems in India is often so large that the government alone will not be able to address some of these problems. So I have just put out a few statements to actually break some of the myths around this mistrust and to highlight to you that in India, we have a state civil society and market system, which is actually fairly cooperative. And we need to bring back that trust by doing good work, by supporting each other. Moving on to markets, and this is what I wanted to highlight to all of you. We hear about CSR a lot because it's a new law, right? And it's in the news because there are oftentimes regulations, etc., that are in discussion. So the news ends up covering it. But if you actually look at the funding landscape of India, you will see that most of the funding is coming from domestic sources. 84% is coming from domestic sources, out of which only 23% actually comes from corporate social responsibility. 61% of India's funding is generated by individuals, which is basically a mix-up of family philanthropy and retail philanthropy. By retail philanthropy, you must have seen websites like Milap, Keto, etc., which raise funds for crowdfunding on certain causes. So that is what retail philanthropy is, where individuals can contribute a 100 rupee amount to a 1,000 rupee amount on specific causes. So I really wanted to highlight to you this gap, that even though we are going to be focusing on corporate social responsibility today, there is a lot of funding that actually comes from individuals and families in the country. And we must definitely acknowledge the role that families and individuals have played in nation building. And I'm sure that all of you have heard of stalwarts like the Tatas or Azim Premjis, the Birlas. They've always played a role in nation building since the time of independence. And there has been deep trust between some of these individual philanthropists and the government, as well as the civil society. And this is something that I wanted to leave you with over here. Now, with regard to the need for funding, we do need a lot more funders to focus on the social sector. These are just some basic trends on what is the kind of inequality that India is seeing right now. We actually made a lot of progress in the last 10 years on multidimensional poverty indicators, but the pandemic has again pushed 200 million Indians back to poverty. And at the same time, we've seen an increase in the number of billionaires in this country. So as we are seeing individual wealth grow, there is an opportunity to actually advocate and influence some of these individuals to give back to the society, because the extent of the problem is very, very large in India. Now over here, I just wanted to present to you this map, and you can look at it at your own time. I will be sharing this presentation with you. This actually tells you about all the different stakeholders that are there in India. And you can just look at these logos and maybe just go through it at your own time to see how complicated and strong the Indian funding and civil society landscape is at this point in time. It has become extremely professional and extremely corporatized over the last few years, especially with the advent of CSR. And it has become a field in itself. So I know that a lot of you are also professors at universities. At this stage, the sector is no longer a voluntary sector. It is now a sector which is highly dynamic and very, very professionally run. And this slide is actually just to showcase to you the high competency and diversity of actors that are engaged in the sector at this point in time. This is just a prelude to the larger landscape in India. And I'll pause here to see if any of you have any thoughts, reflections, or comments.
Ami, which is easier to get, the government funding or the private funding?
Honestly, it depends on the cause also. I think largely with the government funding, it depends on how your organization is placed within the larger structures, right? So if you are focusing on, say, for instance, SC/ST welfare, and there is a direct link to social justice ministry, etc., there could be ways in which you could be helped better. But private philanthropy, typically in India, actually funds most of the causes. And private philanthropy is definitely something that you can probably get access to funding from more easily than government funding.
And is there a format for the proposal writing?
Yes, yes. We'll be covering that towards the end of the project.
All right.
For the end of the presentation. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all. You can continue.
Okay. All right. Yes, how can we approach an organization for CSR? We'll just deep dive into CSR in a bit. Before that, I just wanted to give you some context on the demand and supply. Right now, I've given you a general overview on the funding landscape and the civil society in India. Now I'll just go into a little bit of the women's empowerment related indicators in the country. So if you look at the stats in India right now, on the sustainable development goals, gender equality is actually one of the most backward indicators that we have. We are in an aspirational state where only 4 out of the 29 states have actually reached the halfway mark to the national objectives. And the rank that India has on the World Economic Forum's gender gap report is also fairly low at 140 out of 156 countries. So this is basically the state of affairs on the demand side. There is definitely a very high demand. And I have also shared some of these facts so that if in case any of you are writing proposals later on, you can just pick up the data from here and use it in your proposals as well. Now I wanted to show you this, this map, which actually shows you the way in which CSR funding is structured and the need for funding, right? So if you see, the dark red is where there is highest need for women's empowerment, and dark blue is where there is highest funding being deployed to women's empowerment. So it's almost like the funding is very skewed. You just need to look at this map once to see that where the need is most, the funding is least, and where the need is less, the funding is most. Why does this happen? What are the reasons for this? So let's investigate that a little bit. If you look at the government's gender budget, you will see that it's only 1% of India's total GDP. And as you know, women are half of the country's population. 70% of the total CSR spending, an analysis of the last 4 to 5 years has shown, went to education, healthcare, rural development, environment, sustainability, and poverty. And 60% funds with regard to private philanthropy go to health and education alone. An analysis done by the UNDP and Samhita showed that the top 100 BSc companies spent only 4% on women's empowerment. So women's empowerment is definitely an issue that is running far behind. So I have a pause prompt. So should I take some of the questions right now, or should I move like these questions?
There are a couple of questions, Ami. You can take them if you want.
Okay, sure. So how can we approach an organization for CSR is something that we will be covering in a bit. So I'm just coming to it. Will you please share funding available for independent women? Could you please clarify this question, Sugandha ji, if I can request you to please do that?
You have to unmute yourself, Sugandha ji. You are muted.
Do you mean scholarships and loans, etc., available to independent women?
I just have a clarification. Does CSR cater to independent women, or is it always to a group?
No, it does not cater to independent women, and that's exactly where we are going
Yes.
to next. Yeah. So I actually wanted to go deep dive into CSR because that was also the context of our presentation today. So let me just go straight in, and I think some of your questions will get answered there as well. I think the next section will clarify a lot. So this is actually a deep dive of the Samhita UNDP study. If you see 59% of the CSR expenditure within women's empowerment is also going to economic empowerment of women. So what IFUA is doing is actually the popular choice for most CSR companies, which is great because it's actually a match. So vocational training, SHG creation, and entrepreneurship development are top causes for CSR expenditure. And these are some of the other areas where companies are spending. These are the top 100 companies. Now, I also wanted to show you this information because I think this will clarify some details that you were looking at. Now, who is eligible for undertaking CSR expenditure, right? Who are the companies who are eligible? So one is any company who has a net worth of 500 crores, any company that has a turnover of 1,000 crores or more, or any company which has a profit of more than 5 crores. They have to expend 2% of their net profits on CSR. Who is eligible for receiving CSR funds? Any entity that the company itself has established under Section 8 or under the Registered Public Trust Act, which gives you a 12A or 80G certification under the IT Act of 1961, or any entity that has been established by the central government or state government under the Section 8 Act or a Registered Trust or Society Act. Statutory bodies established by an act of parliament or state legislature, or a company established under Section 8 of the Act, or a registered public trust or society under Section 12A and 80G of the IT Act are actually eligible for receiving CSR funds. So that answers your question that individuals cannot avail CSR funding unless they belong to a public trust or a Section 8 company. Having said that, since a lot of you are asking about money that is available to independent women, I will be happy to share a few leads to scholarships and other kinds of funds, microfinance opportunities available to single women and independent women by some CSR funds. So there are certain scholarships and funds that do run. Like an IDFC First Bank, for instance, provides funding and scholarships for women who want to undertake their MBAs from a lower income background. So since I have insight into some of these details, I'll be happy to share this information with you. I can send it to Purabhi ji, who can actually send it onwards to you, and you can share it within your networks. I hope that will be useful. I earlier shared with you data on the top 100 Bombay Stock Exchange companies. But if you look at the Ministry of Corporate Affairs data, it's also a very interesting story, right? Less than 1% of the total CSR expenditure is actually going towards women's empowerment. And if you look at the top 5 states receiving CSR funds, it's Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, Delhi, and Tamil Nadu. And if you look at the top 5 companies, it's Reliance, TCS, Tata Sons, HDFC, and ONGC. And despite the mandate being so strict on CSR, somehow 3% companies are still undertaking less than the prescribed mandated amount or are making no expenditure at all. So it is a very dismal state of affairs. And I do think that industry and companies can do a lot more with regard to women's empowerment, especially since 33% of them are not even following the mandate that the government has set. Now, I wanted to call out very specifically gender-focused programs that are permitted under the CSR law as per Schedule 7. Schedule 7 is a list, and you'll find a link below, which tells you all the different activities that are permitted for CSR. So number 1 is promoting education, employment, and enhancing vocational skills, especially among women, children, elderly, or the differently abled, for livelihood enhancement. So as you can see that this is a very, very important indicator that we have over here. The second thing is promoting gender equality for empowering women, setting up homes or hostels for women and orphans. So that's also a very important activity over here. And then is contribution to the PM's National Relief Fund or any other fund set up by the central government for the socio-economic development, relief, or welfare of scheduled castes, tribes, backward classes, minorities, and women. So these are the 3 areas under which CSR can provide funds to women. Yeah. I think there's a question in the chat which says, what is the number of companies that can spend on CSR? So this is basically the total CSR expenditure is 20359 crores. And I think the number of companies is also mentioned on my PPT. I'll just show it to you in a bit. These are direct snapshots actually from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs website. So if you see here, this is self-reported data by the companies on women's empowerment. So if you see here, 520 companies are giving to women's empowerment, about 135 crores cumulatively in the year 2020-21. And I will leave you with these data points so that you also know who are the companies that you can approach who are already champions in the space. Now, the way that the data is structured on the Ministry of Women's Empowerment on the MCA site, they've actually divided it such that they call out women's empowerment separately and then they call out gender equality. So the specifics of it are not very clear. They are a bit nebulous, but it's linked to how the companies are reporting their data. So I've also provided you details over there. Again, here there are 135 companies giving to gender equality, and you can see the top players over here. And finally, you have setting up homes and hostels for women. So you will see which are the companies that are champions in this space. So you have an Infosys, an L&T, a Reliance General Insurance, etc. So you can find these details here. I'll just pause here to see if there are any reflections, thoughts, or comments, and then I'll move on to the next part.
I have one question here, Ami. Can you hear me? Ami,
Yes,
can you hear me?
I can. Yes, I can.
Okay, I just wanted to know that when you're talking about women empowerment, is there something specifically on education? Higher education?
Yes. There is. Higher education is definitely a focus. And like I can show you again for the under Schedule 7, higher education, livelihoods, and skill development is definitely a priority area for the government as well.
Okay, that is which number in Schedule 7? Can you just...
So it's basically under point 2, right below point 1, promoting education, including special education, employment enhancement, etc.
There's nothing on higher education specifically, right?
No, nothing on higher education specifically. But there is a lot of emphasis on higher education and secondary education for girls, because at the primary level, there has been a tremendous improvement in Indian indicators with regard to school enrollment, etc. But the problem is that the dropout happens at the secondary level. So there is a tremendous emphasis, and it can be very good to make a case for higher education of women with regard to CSR. Yeah.
Sugandhaji,
how much can an organization say if you are asked for? Is it in any ratio, any proportion?
I think it depends on the kind of program that you build out, and CSR is often very strict about the way in which they ask you for details about the programs. So let me just cover a little bit of their compliance and financial information requirement next. so that that becomes clearer. There is no ratio with regard to how much you can ask, but there are set
She
ratios.
doesn't talk to her. She doesn't talk to her. So today he was upset with Manish also because Manish did not come. He said that
I'm muting it, whoever it is, you carry on.
Okay, okay. So
Ami, I have one question, Ami.
yeah.
So as you, explained the criteria like 500 crores or the
Who's talking? Who was on the mic?
Purabhi Vandana this side.
Vandana, okay, yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
Vandana.
hi.
Please
I'm
carry on.
asking
Yeah,
a
yeah.
question. I'm just,
Please repeat, yeah.
yeah. So, Ami, because since you have mentioned a criteria, is it mandatory for the companies, to, undertake the CSR expenditure, or any punitive measures also there by government that if they are not undertaking this activity?
Yes, yes. There are punitive measures. If they don't spend that amount, they have to transfer it to the government.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ami.
Yeah. So they have to transfer it to government funds like National Relief Fund, Disaster Management Fund, etc. So they don't have a way out of it. They have to anyway let go of that money. So it is better that they create programs.
So if we calculate, cost benefit kind of thing, I don't know whether it has been done or not. So is it, more advisable to spend on the CSR activity or, letting the fund go to government? So returns are more in which aspect? The spending, is better or, sending it to government is better for a company point of view?
Yeah. So if you can see only 33% out of the approximately 9,000 companies did not spend, right? Which clearly shows that it makes sense to give to the civil society. If I can take you back to the state of the social sector, we have very many NGOs in this country who are doing very phenomenal work. And it's not always possible for the government to be everywhere, which is why it is important to give to these non-profit organizations, especially voluntary organizations like IFUA, who are in better touch with the beneficiaries on ground. So in my opinion, it is definitely useful to provide money to the social sector rather than straight away transferring it to government.
But the share is, but so far it is only 33%. That means
Only 33 are
large number-
defaulting.
Yeah, so large number of companies are there where we can approach as if
Yes,
we can
yes.
approach.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Ami.
Yeah. 33% are defaulting, but everybody else has sort of come on board.
Okay,
And
33 is
yeah.
defaulters. Okay.
Yeah. So almost more than 70% people are actually happy to focus on CSR, which is a great sign because the rules are only 5 to 6 years old. And we spent 2 years in the COVID-19 pandemic, where a lot of funds were provided to on-ground relief efforts. So definitely there is a lot of potential to actually leverage CSR expenditure for women's empowerment. I have left details of this on the slide for you so that you can also see the companies that are already champions. So you can approach these companies also. I wanted to just move now because a lot of you have questions around what is it that you do to apply for a CSR proposal. Let me spend a little bit more time over here. And then if time permits, I'll also show you some examples of CSR projects. I hope that's a good way to approach this. Now, there are certain must-haves when you are applying for a CSR proposal, right? They are very stringent because the government is very stringent about CSR expenditures. And the government really tracks the ways in which people are spending CSR money. So while I have not shared a template from you, some of these titles are picked up directly from a template. If you want, we can do one more session where you actually learn how to fill out this template on your own, so that you can actually bring one program, you think about it, and I can help you sort of work in groups to figure out what the details should be under each of these different items. But I will right now cover all the different ideas that you need to cover in a CSR proposal template. So first you begin with details about the project. You write a title of the project, say for instance, economic empowerment of young women who are graduating from STEM backgrounds in XYZ university, right? Then you have a summary of the project where you just summarize what your key approach is. Then you write down your target beneficiaries. So you say that you are looking at girls who have finished an education in STEM and are between the age group of 18 to 21. I'm just giving you examples. Then you write down lives impacted. By lives impacted, we mean that how many women are you targeting through your program? So are you targeting 50 women? Are you targeting 10 women? You write down the target beneficiaries. And then you say the geography. So whether you're based in Kochi, Calcutta, Nagpur, etc., you write down those details. Then you write the statement of the problem. So what is the problem? Why do you need to run your programs? So you say that without soft skill upgradation, say for instance, of girls who are graduating with a STEM degree, it is very difficult for them to find jobs. And without adequate placement, they do not have financial decision-making abilities, etc. Now you say, what is the problem that the project is trying to address and why is it important? So you write down a little bit of the why. You can actually talk about the female labor force participation in India, which, as I think many of you may know, is only 21%. And if you look at feminist economists, they often give the example of how in India, despite improvement in indicators related to education, the labor force participation rate has continued to remain dismal. Why is that? So that is somehow the problem that you are trying to solve, and you can provide some stats and facts around it. Now, you also provide milestones, timelines, and a Gantt chart over here, which means that you almost create a schedule of your program. Say, for instance, your program is 1 year long. You write down what are the different milestones. So say phase 1 will be training of the girls. Phase 2 will be internships. Phase 3 will be placements. And then after the placements, you can also have some sort of a tracking mechanism. So this is how you will create your program. So you will write down in what month you are doing what activity, etc. You will create almost like a timetable and map of the way in which you're running the program. Next, you will provide a monitoring and evaluation framework. I wanted to understand if many of you are aware of a monitoring and evaluation framework, or is this a little bit of a new word for you?
Indiraji, you must be aware of it, right? Vandana ji?
Okay. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Purabhi, actually, I missed it.
I'm not aware of this.
Okay, sure.
People who are in HR will know. I mean, she should know. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. I can also, which is why I think that it might be useful to maybe send you a few proposals so that you can look at it. In the social sector, we usually follow a pattern to describe what our program is about. And CSR is very strict about making sure that you provide that kind of rubric or that kind of table to qualify what your program is going to be. So let me take the same example that I have been taking from the start, which you all have only mentioned, which is with regard to skilling and livelihood upgradation. So what is an activity you will do in this case? Say, for instance, you want to integrate it in college curriculum itself. So you will create a course. So creating a course becomes an activity. Your output is the delivery of the course. Your outcome is that the girl child has gotten educated, and your target is that 50 girl children achieve that education, right? So you will create a timetable keeping this framework in mind, where you will track different activities. What are the indicators of success? What are the outputs and what are the outcomes that you're trying to drive through this particular activity? And you will have an impact evaluation plan, because for CSRs, it's very important that they are able to show you the ways in which they are succeeding. So say 50 girls trained is a good number of impact that the CSR companies will ask you for. Or 50 girls placed in XYZ industry after the training is also a good impact evaluation indicator. For impact evaluation, sometimes it is also recommended to have an independent agency do the impact evaluation for you. So if you remember the map, the landscape that I showed you, where I said that the sector has become very professional, there are independent evaluation agencies like a Satva, a Samhita, etc., who actually assess CSR projects, and usually the company will actually pay for the impact evaluation, but you can have a plan in place that year 1 is pilot, year 2 is when you do a midterm study, year 3 is when you do your conclusion and you see what is the long-term impact that the study had had. If you have any baseline numbers, so if you have already done a survey with your target beneficiaries, up with the girls, that what is their need for training, etc., you can always provide those details in a CSR proposal under the monitoring and evaluation framework. And then finally, it is extremely important for CSR to focus on organizational profile. Because for them, working with highly credible organizations is a very, very key mandate, since they are affected by a lot of compliance and stringency issues otherwise. So in terms of your organizational profile, you have to have a vision, mission, goals. You have to write down key accomplishments that the organization has had. What is the qualification of the leadership and the board members? What are the staff sizes, the capabilities of different staff members, and financial information. So, which brings me to the next point, which is linked entirely to legal and financial information. But I will pause here to see if there are any further questions.
Ami, in the event that we pick up a project and we seek CSR help, will you be with us and guide us? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can. So this will,
you know, I've seen the proposal, how it has to be done, but
yeah,
we are a novice in this field because IFUWA has never gone into this kind of an alliance with for CSR.
yeah.
Supposing we choose a project, the projects committee, and we write out a proposal and we send it to you, can you help us in doing this?
Yeah, I can definitely review it for you, and I can also share some guiding documents that will help you copy the formats. And I'd also like to tell you that some organizations have their own CSR proposal formats, but largely they will have the same broad indicators. And you can even do a quick Google search to verify this. And you will see that most companies follow this sort of a format in requisitioning for proposals from organizations like yourself. While I will help you do this, I think that there is a very strong emphasis on the registration and other details. So I do want to just clarify the financial and legal compliances that CSR usually asks for. So is IFUA actually registered as a trust or Section 8 company? Does it have a 12A or 80G certificate? I think this is question number 1.
No, I don't think, no, we don't have the 80G certificate.
Yeah, so without an 80G 12A certificate, it is very difficult to requisition for CSR funds in the
So
first
that is
place.
the first step.
That is the first step. And to get CSR funding also, you require like you need to have an 80G or 12A, or you need to show that you have been working as a non-profit for 3 years plus. And I know that IFUA is a very old organization, so you may have to work with some legal and financial professionals, because this is not specifically my area of specialization. I'm calling that out, but I can connect you to people who can help you figure that out in order to get access to that 12A 80G certification.
Anjali, we can discuss this separately. This is not a part of this.
So.
Yeah. One more thing that I wanted to emphasize on as an interesting point of view is that you can also collaborate with a CSR foundation that is already working in the space. And you can charge money only for your services to the CSR agency. So that way you probably don't need 12A 80G if you already are in touch with the CSR foundation. Now, there is a question around who do we present the proposal to. Usually, there will be a board in the CSR that the proposal goes to. Some companies will have an open call for applications. Other companies, you will have to approach them by actually seeing who is working in your area and region on issues related to women's empowerment and approach their departments. In most companies, they don't have a CSR department. They have the HR department, which looks after CSR. So they double up as also CSR professionals. So you can write to the HR professional. And usually companies will have a section on CSR where they will write down who their officers are that you can connect with. So that's also a good way of approaching the companies. Like, for instance, if you go to the HDFC website, you will find information on who the CSR staff is and who you can write to. But you need to narrow down on who are the companies that are focusing on some of the things that you are also interested in. But first things first, you may need to connect to figure out whether you are a proper entity to receive CSR funds. So what you need is a unique CSR registration number in terms of compliance. You need the year of registration, details about FCRA registration. FCRA is Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, even though this is not directly linked to CSR, which is why it is not mandatory. You need a copy of your 12A registration, 80G registration, 35AC, and you need the PAN card and the TAN card as applicable. So you need all these different compliance documents in order to receive CSR funds. As per the CSR Act, there are certain caps, and this is what I also wanted to focus on, that the project duration has to be 3 years. If it is more than 3 years, it's highly unlikely that a CSR company is interested in it. So even if you have a 10-year proposal, break it down into smaller grants of 1 year, 3 years, etc. Ideally, ask for a grant proposal of 1 year, and then the next year you ask for an extension by repeating that kind of a grant format. So whenever you're creating your proposal, have a 1 year view in mind and know that you can ask for a do-over of that grant, but don't create a grant proposal with a very long-term view, because under the CSR law, they are not very friendly towards very long-term grant requisitions. They look at social projects in a project mode, mission mode, that you do it for 3 years, 4 years, and you solve the problem and you get out of it. They don't see it as something that you can keep going on doing and doing and doing. So you have to have that kind of discernment to create your timelines accordingly. Now, one thing that the CSR law very clearly states is that administrative overheads should not cross 5%. And this is more important for the company than for you all, because what it means is that if there is a CSR foundation and they are hiring staff, their hiring staff should not get more than 5%. But if you are teachers who are running a program, and as part of your teaching, you are imparting certain knowledge to the children, then your costs actually get included in the program costs and not the administrative costs. So this is not very relevant to you, but I've still called it out. And the companies also have a cap of 5% on impact assessment. So when you are creating your proposal, try not to make the impact assessment money more than 5% of your total proposal. So this is with regard to certain things linked to ratio and proportion. In general, when you're looking at your administrative costs, this is just based on some intuitive knowledge and understanding. CSR companies become very doubtful when you're spending more than 15% on administrative costs. So try to minimize that to 15% and focus more on program costs. Money that is directly going to the beneficiaries, money that is directly going in running the programs, and not towards your own salaries. So that is just a general tip from my side. The CSR law also says that focus on local area expenditure, but this is more like a directive principle. It's not mandatory. However, having said that, even though this is a directive principle, if you remember the map that I showed you and you saw how funding is restricted, largely focused on certain states, It's because industrialization is also highest in these states. So invariably, companies end up giving to their backyards. So if you are in Calcutta, Kochi, etc., it makes sense to know who the companies are around you and ask them to give money to you in the local region, rather than aiming for asking money from a company that's very far away. Because even for them, if they want to visit or if they want to create volunteer opportunities for their employees, they may not be able to do so if they are so far away from the geographical location. So this is just a friendly tip from my side, that if you are applying to companies, look at your local companies. I can pause to see if there are any questions at this stage.
No, I don't think there are questions because the whole idea is very new to us.
Okay. All right. So should I just cover one last piece that I had
Yes.
of examples of CSR projects? Okay, great. So I wanted to actually share with you this gender continuum, which actually looks at how programs in women's empowerment could be, right? And this is based on WHO's framework on gender empowerment. So if you see, anything that we do can have a negative or positive impact on women's empowerment, right? So if we look at gender unequal, like basically there is a continuum along which our programs run. So it starts at gender unequal and it goes up to gender transformative. Unequal programs are programs which are blatantly bad for women. So if we set up a livelihoods mission where women are only getting casual work or informal work, then it becomes a gender unequal program. A gender blind program is basically programs that don't consider gender related dimensions while creating their programs. A gender sensitive program is a program that understands that yes, there are gender discriminations and accordingly creates a program. A gender specific program is something that is focused specifically on women. So say for instance, having creche at the work site is a gender specific program, and gender transformative program is a program that tries to go above and beyond and tries to change the way in which gender discrimination is structured in the world. So it focuses on, for instance, developing leadership among girls, helping women break the stereotypes of gender roles, etc. So using this framework, I'm sharing with you some examples of CSR programs. For instance, the Hero Motor Corp runs a Ride Safe India initiative, which actually works with school and college students in order to organize road safety awareness programs. Now, road safety for students across is largely gender neutral because the program doesn't care whether it's women, men, girls, boys, etc. So this program becomes gender blind. Gender sensitive is, for instance, a program called Digital Empowerment of Women by Idea Cellular. Under this particular initiative, what Idea Cellular tried to do is that they focused on ensuring that girls are empowered with digital literacy. So they get internet on their phones and they have access to healthcare, banking, education, and they're also able to understand how better to earn their livelihoods. So this is gender sensitive because they understood that there are gaps in women and men's access to certain technologies and they tried to bridge that. The RPG group ran a program called Project Swayam, where they took women from less privileged backgrounds and they tried to incorporate them in the logistics supply chain by making them two-wheeler delivery professionals, making them forklift operators, auto rickshaw drivers, etc. Now, these are roles traditionally taken up by men. But what RPG was able to do was that they questioned gender stereotypes and they were able to create programs that transformed gender roles over a long period of time. So these are just some examples of how companies run different programs. And I think personally that you need all kinds of programs in order to finally achieve the large milestone of women's empowerment in India. So I don't think that one program can be pitted against each other, but this kind of an understanding is just useful to see what kind of a program one is developing. Yeah. So about your question, Sarah, with regard to a bus for conveyance, usually CSR expenditure is restricted to projects and capital expenditure is highly discouraged in the case of CSR. So bus, equipment, etc. are not things that CSR usually funds. Project mode delivery of programs is preferred by CSR companies. So you have to have a program cycle, you have to have a 3-year plan of change, then you can receive CSR funding.
Suppose it
Well,
is
we got
for
some
children
idea,
who
at
are
least I got some
economically
idea
backward.
about, I mean, it's quite a process that one has to follow to get the CSR.
Absolutely.
The
So-
designing of the project comes first and the ATG certificate, all this are the prerequisites to start, but there's no harm making an attempt.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I wanted to call out to you one important fact that I shared with you, that CSR is not the only source of funding in India. I want to take you back to the slide that I had shared with you, where I also called out how private philanthropy is one of the largest contributors. So if you see, CSR is only 23% of India's funding pie. But even if you want to get funding from family philanthropists, you need to have a proposal. But if you have a small request like getting a bus for children in an underprivileged school, it is more likely that you are able to raise that money from family philanthropists than CSR. Because family philanthropists are doing it out of their own goodwill, out of their own compassion. So they are not going to hold you accountable to what are you going to do with that asset. Whereas CSR is accountable to government norms, and government norms do not allow or do not encourage capital assets under the CSR law.
Okay.
Yeah. I will be happy to help you figure out the proposal process and share with you some templates that you can glance through at your own time before we meet again. Just so
Sure,
that you can
thank you.
glance through it at your own convenience. And with regard to legal and financial compliance, I can always connect you to people who know a bit more than me, because I'm not the best person there. Yeah.
Maybe you will
but we'll
forward
put some
the
picture of it.
PowerPoint. Yeah, will you forward the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially the proposal writing.
Yeah, I can actually add a few proposal writing links.
Yeah,
and
do
then
that.
forward it to you.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Ranjanadi, should Gomati ji do the...
Gomati has
vote of
joined.
thanks?
I can see. Gomati, can you manage the vote of thanks? Gomati, are you there? No, I think Purabhi, you go ahead. I can see her name, but I can't. She's not responding.
Yeah, I think she's not doing too well. Thank you, Ami, for such a wonderful presentation that you've given us. And a lot of things which many of us knew were revisited and put together. And many of the things we didn't know, we got to know. You told us about the funding landscape, and also you told us and helped us understand how family philanthropy could be of great help to the projects, which one should explore, because then you don't have to go through the compliances. And you made us understand the compliances and what we should do to look at the compliances in a more streamlined fashion. You also helped us understand the demand and supply constraints, eligibility of receiving CSR funds with special emphasis on women empowerment. You helped us understand proposal writing and, of course, the compliances, which is indeed going to be very, very useful for us. I thank all the participants for being actively associated with the program and being into the program and asking all the relevant questions, which also made us think and look at possibilities from IFA point of view and also from our own point of view for our broader perspectives. Thank you so much. And thank you, Ranjana Di, for giving us this opportunity to have Ami on board and have this program. And it's really
Yes,
been a great,
great
time.
learning.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ami, and thank you so much, everyone.
I would also like to thank all of you for hearing me out, and I'm very happy to work with you. And I would especially like to thank Purubhi for all the patience that she has shown.
You made it up with the presentation. It was a wonderful presentation.
And thank you so much, Professor Banerjee, too, for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Should I log out, Ranjana Di?
Yes, I think log out.
Thank you.
Anybody has any question for Ami before she leaves? Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
very much. Thank you all.
Happy.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Randana,
Bye-bye.
Purobhi.
Thank you, Sudhaji. Thank you. Good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.
Good night.
Good
Bye.
night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Ami, you'll mail the PPT to me,
Yes,
no, with the
yes.
additions and all.
Yeah, I'll just add the proposal.
Yeah,
form.
yeah. Please. Thank you.